Hey everyone, my name is Richard and welcome to this week's Stock Market Outlook video sponsored by MarketSmith. And this week on the Nasdaq Composite started out pretty strongly with a nice close here on Monday. Then on these 2 days we had a little bit of consolidation. I don't like how they closed off their highs here. That doesn't really show a lot of support at this moment. And this day you can see took out both sides of Wednesday's range and closed pretty much mid-bar. So a little bit of churning action on higher volume. And then Friday, we opened within this downside wick from the close to the low here and moved up towards this close, but we were rejected and ended up finishing at the lows of the day pretty much, the lows of the week as well, and below 14,000. So not a really positive end to the week here. And the expectation maybe is a test of the 21 EMA or potentially this higher low. So that is the Nasdaq on a daily. And on a weekly, it is pretty tight here at all-time highs, but you do see a downside reversal bar as we fail kind of this ultimate breakout through this base. So that is one thing to be wary of. And looking at the S&P 500, let me X out here. It's also very tight near all-time highs. Again, a little bit of a fail of the move towards higher all-time highs and going over to a daily. Looks very similar to the Nasdaq. Pretty tight the first few days of the week. Then a push up here on Thursday, a stronger close than the Nasdaq, but once again, a kind of expectation breaker on this Friday. Maybe we need to pull back to these lows, which also lines up with the 21 EMA, this purple line right here. But anyway, a lot of growth stock traders are very frustrated in this choppy market. And these charts, the Nasdaq and the S&P 500, don't really reflect the overall weakness in a lot of the kind of leadership stocks, the smaller caps. And for that, you really have to go to the IWO, which we can see is still basing, still within this base here, starting at this all-time high of 339.91, moving down to the 280s here. And we're still below this midpoint, which I think is a very critical level. And last week, we were kind of rejected here as well at this high of 314.68. So we're back at the 50 SMA, 21 EMA confluence. So we'll see if we can kind of get some support here, or we could pull back to 300 once again. But until this really starts trending, takes out this pivot, and builds out this right-hand side and pushes back towards all-time highs, it's going to be a little bit choppier for the more faster growing companies that are smaller caps. The S&P 500 and Nasdaq are really dominated by those big caps, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, which overall are doing better than the smaller caps over the past month or so. So something to keep in mind, don't get too frustrated if you're trading these smaller names. This is still basing. And once we build out a trend above the 21 EMA and the 50 SMA like we had back here, that's when the money is made. This is still just a base building process, a normal consolidation so far after this strong run. So that is kind of three main indexes in MarketSmith. And in this video, we'll go through some potential new leadership stocks that I'm watching closely. We'll go through some old leaders to check up on them. We'll talk about the indexes a little bit more in depth. We'll talk about sentiment, the IBD Big Picture article, as well as the GMI signal, and put it all together at the very end. And I'll give you my stock market outlook. So if you do enjoy this video, please go ahead and leave a like down below. It really does help me out and my channel. And of course, subscribe if you want to see more videos just like this one every single week. So diving in, let's start with potential new leadership. And I will be taking some of these off this list this week because we had some bad performances due to earnings. But overall, let's sort by that weekly change. Zim continues to trend beautifully here. You had some potential entries at the 21 EMA down here, breaks of some declining trend lines, looks pretty strong. Very strong trend, nothing to complain about. Definitely a little bit short-term extended from a proper entry, but we'll see if it can kind of give us a way in later on down the road. CPE as well moved up strongly off the 50 SMA. Did have some kind of negative action on this Thursday and Friday, but it was on lower volume. And here we've got some nice volume pushing off that key moving average. So still base building as well, rejected at this level for now, but I definitely think a stock to watch in a leading group at the moment. Facebook as well, nice strong earnings gap up on large volume, strong closing range as well. Then a consolidation day on Friday. I don't want to see it undercut this low and kind of live below it. And I think if it breaks below this level here, that's definitely a severe negative for the market. And overall, we want to see strong earnings gap ups like this on volume, follow through to the upside. That tells us that institutions are supporting those type of stocks. NUE as well broke a downward trend line this past week. Looks pretty strong. A lot of volume coming in here, so that's something to be wary of. But overall, a decent closing range, even though it was a down day. But we'll see how this acts as well. Net continues to move up strongly, the right-hand side. Nice kind of consolidation last week and holding up better than a lot of growth stocks on Thursday and Friday. Just kind of building out a potential handle here. Definitely one to watch and see if you can push through this pivot at 88.04 and provide a pretty good low-risk entry. Snap reported earnings here. Looked pretty bad early in the day. It gapped up, then basically retraced all the way to the prior close, but then had supportive action, and now it's just kind of going sideways. So this area right here is kind of chop here around 64, 65. It was rejected here, here, and pretty much here as well. So once it can finally push through that, maybe we can approach the prior highs and start to build out a trend like we saw from its previous earnings gap up on huge volume. So nice estimates on this one. We'll see how this plays out. I like how all the moving averages are curling under the price, and we'll see if we can push out and form this right side of the base. RH continues to trend well above the 21 EMA. Some negative action here on Thursday on higher volume, but overall this is a strong non-tech leader, so definitely one to consider if you don't want too much exposure to that one sector. LRCX, you can see consolidating above this prior breakout level, a little bit choppy here and not a good close, and the volume was kind of higher than the previous 4 days on Friday, so we'll see if we can kind of find supportive action next week, retake that 21 EMA, and NVIDIA also pull back below this pivot, which is a negative, but we'll see if we can find support at the 21 EMA. I do like the look of this volume coming in and how this pullback is on low relative volume to the breakout volume. SQ also chopping up here below this kind of midpoint pivot here. And yeah, this decline is on below average volume, but you've got some some kind of poor closes in here and yeah, some downside reversals within this consolidation. AMAT also going sideways like NVIDIA and LRCX. SMH looks a little bit weaker than these potential leaders within that group, semiconductors, but it is pulling back to the 50. You really want to see this kind of stay above this higher low and the 50 SMA. And SE, you can see pull back below this kind of pivot here. I want to see it hold the 250s as well as this 21 EMA and start to push up the right-hand side once again. PIN's earnings gap down, holding 65 for now, but this needs time and it's just kind of base building at this moment. And if you want to see a really in-depth analysis of pins and how you could have played this past year, check out the video, which will be popping out right now with Ray, really in-depth talking about winning characteristics and how to position in a leading stock during this consolidation before this kind of 150% move. So definitely check that out. It'll be linked above right now and in the description. And finally, we've got Twitter, earnings gap down on high volume. There's a no touch for me. It needs a lot of time. And there's a lot of better options trending like CPE, Zim, NUE, Facebook even. So this one is not really on my radar anymore. So I'll be taking that off this list along with pins. And we'll see how the other ones do next week. And actually, quickly going back to potential new leadership, let me know down below in the comments if there's any stocks I should add to this list. It's always good to keep it updated. So moving on, let's go old leaders. And first up, let's sort by that weekly change. Shop tried to break out here through this pivot, this cheat, but some negative action. So a lot of reversals are failing. That's kind of an indication of this environment that we're in. You got to take profits when you have them until we see kind of trends lasting weeks instead of days. It's good to kind of take profits early when you have them. Nets looks strong. We already talked about it. Futu building out above the 50 SMA once again. I don't like this high volume after the secondary offering and how it didn't really have any support on this day, down 23%. This isn't really a proper base. Apps still base building. Doesn't look too good. I don't like this volume here, but it did start to move up on Friday. SQ we talked about. Corsair, you can see, is building out a longer term base, forming out some higher lows. Could be one to watch if it can push through this level, these anchor VWAPs from the IPO, as well as the highs. XP, no touch for me, back at the 200 SMA. Zscaler, building out a little bit of a consolidation here, doesn't look too bad. I do want to see it kind of live above the 50 SMA and that 50 SMA to start to curl upwards below price. TSM still base building here. PLTR base building below all the key moving averages. SC we talked about. GRWG base building as well. Upwork base building needs to push up above these pivots. And right now it's below all those key moving averages. Peloton at this kind of base low here. You really want to see that hold. And all the key moving averages are trending down and prices below those key moving averages, which is not a good sign. You can see it was rejected at the 50 SMA. Tesla back above all those key moving averages after a strong upside reversal and bullish outside day on Friday. NEO as well was acting well on this day. So a strong move here on volume, but you want to see it kind of retake this pivot as well as break out above this and start to build out the right-hand side of this base. Roku doesn't look too strong. There was some news about Google not allowing the YouTube app on their service, which could definitely impact their business. And overall, it's still just base building below all the key moving averages. CLH, I tried this one on the breakout, got stopped out on this day as it approached my cost basis. And failed breakout reversal here. And we'll see if we can hold above the 50 SMA. Twilio, base building here, once again rejected from this kind of cheap pivot. Not a great day on this Thursday, as with a lot of growth stocks. But at this moment, it might be it's just below the 50 SMA. Moving on to Fiverr, it's also just base building here below the key moving averages. Doesn't look too good. Just at this moment, there's a lot of better options to trade than these stocks that are still base building. They're going to be chopping around a lot. You want to trade the stocks that are trending above the key moving averages. That's when it's easy to get in a profit right away and take some off the table when you can. So here, it's just hard to trade this. It's going to chop up and down. We want to be buying stocks in trends. That way, we're trading with the wind at our backs, with the current in our favor. NEO, also a strong move on this Friday, although it was rejected at the 50 SMA. So we want to see it move up through this pivot next week and retake those key moving averages. Crowd also building out a right-hand side a little bit, pulling back last week though. Etsy doesn't look too good, breaking through these higher lows on volume, doesn't look too great. Teladoc as well, earnings gap down, but it is holding the low of this base. Pins we talked about, EMPH, earnings gap down as well below the key moving averages. And finally, we've got Twitter, which we already talked about. So overall, there's only a select few of these that I'll be willing to trade, the ones that are building out the right-hand sides near their all-time highs and are acting constructively in terms of price and volume action. So moving on, let's talk about the indexes, go through these. So starting at the top, let's talk about the QQQ. Looks pretty strong, holding above this higher low at the moment. So we'll see if that can hold next week and see if we can kind of push through towards all-time highs once again. But at this moment, we're still just kind of going sideways. And on the weekly chart, as we saw in MarketSmith, we're pretty tight here, right near all-time highs. Going over to the Webby RSI on the Nasdaq Composite, nothing crazy here. We're above that 21 EMA in normal ranges here. So a retest of that 21 EMA wouldn't be out of the question. And going over to the 10-week check, we are pulling back from that kind of more extended level, which is a good sign. Let's let that key moving average catch up. Actually, we want to go to the composite here. Once again, pulling back from that more extended mark. So that is a good sign. And overall on the week, we were down 0.42% on the QQQ with a daily closing range on Friday of 29%, weekly closing range of 18%. So the expectation is pretty much sideways or lower, but we are in a stage 2 uptrend. And looking at the SPY, once again, pretty poor closing range for the week. Daily closing range on Friday was 44%, weekly closing range was 23%. The expectation is sideways or lower, but you are in a stage 2 uptrend, and overall we were up 0.13% on the week. Looking at the IWM, overall we were down 0.39%, daily closing range on Friday of 20%, weekly closing range of 11%, and the expectation is sideways or lower, and we are in a stage 2 uptrend. And looking at GBTC, nice inside week within the space from the high to the close of the previous week. A strong closing range as well, overall up 10.53%, with a daily closing range of 97% on Friday and a weekly closing range of 90%. So the expectation is sideways or higher, and we are in a stage 2 uptrend. Looking at Ethereum, this looks a little bit better than Bitcoin here, breaking above these highs, and overall up 19.83% with a daily closing range of 62%, weekly closing range of 70%. The expectation is sideways or higher, but you might expect some resistance at this previous all-time high at 28.83 or so. And overall, we are in a stage 2 uptrend at this point. Looking at the Dow Jones, pretty much a sideways week here. Weekly closing range was 38%, overall down 0.44%, and the expectation is sideways pretty much, or downward, and we are in a stage 2 uptrend. And moving on to the FFTY, overall, a downside reversal here, not a great look on the weekly. Overall, we are down 0.15%, daily closing range of 25%, and weekly closing range of only 8%. So the expectation is sideways or lower, but we are in a stage 2 uptrend. So lastly, we've got the VIX, and overall, we had some pops up back towards 20, but overall, we still are kind of living below this low right here at around 19.5. So overall, taking a look at the indexes, the QQQ and the SPY are right near all-time highs. They're really being supported by those larger caps. And overall, they didn't have the strongest closes, but we'll see how they hold up next week. But if we look at the IWM, IWO, the small caps, those are not faring quite so well and are still base building at this moment. So moving on, let's talk about my previous focus list. And let's go over there, sort by that weekly change, and talk through the charts. So Vizio, let's go back to a daily here, and actually go back to a daily. So here we had a strong move up off the 21 EMA, pretty good entry point here on this Monday. If you got it, move up, breakout through the IPO base, but then a downside reversal here, and then a continued kind of weakness here on Friday. We moved through this low. That's probably where I would have gotten stopped out here, but we did recover strongly and finish pretty close to all-time highs. So not the greatest bar here. It's a little bit volatile. And you can see this range was 13-14%. It's hard to trade within that type of range. But overall, undercut and reclaim of the 21 EMA. And we'll see how this acts next week. Moving on to CPE, we already talked about this. Strong move off the 50 SMA. Looks pretty good. DEN, strong move up, breakout through this kind of declining trend line here. GS, break through the pivot, trend up, and then kind of a consolidation day on Friday. Snap, we already talked about. HZMP, a little bit volatile here, right near the pivot, and it pulled back to the 21 EMA, although you do have a kind of nice closing range on this Friday on good volume. NVIDIA, we talked about. SQ, we covered. ABNB starting to build out the right-hand side, potentially a little bit of a higher low here, but not a great close on this Friday. Let me hide all these drawings here for just a second so you actually can see here, and it is below a declining 21 and 50 SMA. So not a great bar on this day, and it really has to break through this pivot before it starts to build out that right-hand side. WSM, you can see, try to break out through the earnings gap up anchored VWAP with a nice kicker candle, strong closing range here, but not a great close here, and continued weakness into the end of the week, finishing below that anchored VWAP and the 21 EMA, although it is holding above this higher low. GNRC, you can see, failed the DTL here and had some volatile action here. And so far it is holding above the 50, but at this moment looks like it needs a little bit of time. Really, it has to get above this level, this horizontal level, before it can really start to challenge these all-time highs. Tesla, we already talked about. Strong move on Friday. CLH, we talked about. Crowd, same thing. Dash looked promising through this pivot, but an expectation breaker on this Thursday, and then not a good close to the week below all the key moving averages on Friday. SSTK as well broke expectations, closing below this higher low on this Tuesday, and then continued weakness back below all the key moving averages. And Lyft was hit pretty hard on this day. Definitely an expectation breaker. This is why you need to have stops in place. And overall, after kind of having some downside reversals at this DTL, broke expectations, and as I said, broke through that 50 SMA, and this was on very high volume. So at this moment, I'm not really focused on this stock. So overall, we had some strong performances. Vizio, CPE, DEN looked pretty good, but obviously we had some that pulled back late last week, as with a lot of growth stocks. So overall, that is my watch list, and make sure you guys tune in later today for my next list of ideas. So moving on, let's talk about sentiment, and let's start with my Twitter polls. And overall, we did see a significant drop to 35.9%. So there is some fear coming back into this market, which is a good thing. And going over to the put-call ratio, this is also increasing, which is a good sign. The Bulls vs. Bears poll is decreasing back below 60. Once again, fear is coming back into the market. And looking at the name exposure index, this is pretty extreme on the 28th. So over 100, definitely a reason to be cautious and ready for potential pullback. So it's kind of expected that on Thursday and Friday we saw some weakness. So I do want to see this really drop next week. So that is sentiment, basically showing that fear is coming back into the market. And moving on to the big picture article, the headline is after big week of earnings, stock market eases why indexes are moderating. And reading through, they talk about the action on Friday, how the Nasdaq avoided a distribution day because the NYSE volume fell. They talk about all the big caps reporting earnings, how there's kind of mixed reactions, a lot of reversals after earnings gap ups. They talk about some breakouts, Hubs, Vizio, ALGN, which also struggled, AZEK and VECO as well. Crocs did pretty well, a nice earnings gap up, and STAA, both of those are doing better after the breakouts. So overall, their current outlook is a confirmed uptrend, 3 distribution days on the Nasdaq, 3 on the S&P 500. So we'll see how it goes next week. And finally, we've got the Wishing Wealth blog, GMI signal, which is still green since April 5th. And on Thursday, the GMI score was a 6 out of 6. So overall, my current view is a confirmed uptrend. But at this moment, I am playing smaller because a lot of my recent trades haven't worked. I've either gotten stopped out for small gains or small losses. So I'm hearing that feedback from the market and taking it into account and kind of waiting until things really start working and stocks start trending once again. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please go ahead and leave a like down below and subscribe if you are new. And I'll see you guys in future videos.